Inside this episode of This Week in Hockey East, I'm Bridget Krug here with Eric Galanti. We have a lot to talk about this week. We had some international hockey in the area that we will get to, and we also have some important games on NESN that will determine who finishes first on the women's side in Hockey East, and a lot of implications for the pairwise and the standings on both sides. But Eric, we're going to start out with our Friday night Hockey East game, UConn at Maine. You'll be up for that one.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. We just were up at Alphon to see Maine and New Hampshire last Saturday for that 2-game series, and we'll be down at UConn. And, the flex scheduling that we talked about, it allows us to see the two teams who are tied for first in Hockey East over the next 2 weeks, Maine this week and Boston College at home next week. But let's start with this Maine team. First of all, go to Alphon if you haven't been to Alphon. My first time. It was amazing. Totally lived up to the hype. It was awesome in every way. And you wonder if Maine kind of woke up. And that's crazy to say because they're tied for first. They've been tied for first. They haven't lost very much, but they'd been doing it without scoring many goals. They actually had not scored more than 3 goals in the entire second half of the season. And then Saturday night, they erupted for 4 goals in the third period alone to beat their rivals. Josh Nadeau was part of that. He had 4 points in the third period. He's our night shift all-academic standout for accomplishing that. So, yes, Alvin Boy has been so good. And yes, Alvin Boy is going to continue to be so good. I don't think there's any surprise there. And, we're going to talk over the next couple of weeks. Who's your Hockey East goalie of the year, Alvin Boy or Jacob Fowler? They basically have identical numbers. That's going to be an interesting conversation. But the fact that if you can add that with the offense that I think we all know is in there for Maine, it just, they've been winning 2-1, 3-2 games here recently. That really creates something that, teams are going to fear having to play that down the stretch of the season. Part of it has been the power play has struggled. It's crazy. Maine is 0 for their last 27 on the power play. It feels impossible considering how well they started. They did score moments after their last power play expired in the third period on Saturday. But so if they could bring that up, because it's not for a lack of chances, but if they could bring that up, if maybe that third period kind of leads to something here and you combine it with Boya, that really could create something. And we'll see. It's hard to believe, but Maine has not won the regular season in Hockey East since 1995. They've won national championships since then. They've won Hockey East tournaments since then. They've, gone to the NCAA tournament since then. They have not been a regular season champ since 1995 when they were a co-champ with BU. So 5 games left. Maine and Boston College. Maine will have this game at UConn, then 2 at home next week against Vermont, and 2 on the road at UMass. BC with 2 at Vermont this weekend, 2 at a home and home with New Hampshire, and then 1 at home against Merrimack the final weekend. So we'll see what happens. It'll be really interesting. But I think this Maine team might be at a point where they're ready to explode with how well they played in the third period on Saturday night.
Yeah, and they're a lock to make the NCAA tournament this year. And even though the power play hasn't scored, I was broadcasting the PC Maine series a few weeks ago, and their power play movement was great. Like, they had a lot of nice rotation. I thought that it's just a matter of time before they score. And I was very impressed with Alvin Boya, who's one of the finalists for the Mike Richter Award for National Goalie of the Year. So definitely some guys to pay attention to, and we'll get to some other guys in this series that could have an impact and maybe already have had an impact when they played the first time. So to look into the UConn side of things, they had a tale of 2 different seasons, really. If you look at where they were before the new year, 8-1 up until December 29th. And then they lose that game to Wisconsin. But since then, they've been really solid, really consistent. 8-2 since that point in the season. And right now they're set up for their first ever bid into the NCAA tournament, which I was talking to you about before this. I can't believe they feel like a team that is always right there. I didn't realize that they had never made it because they've come so close in the past. And it just feels like the way that this team is built and the way that they've been able to play together and how much it seems like they genuinely like to be together and have fun playing together. It seems like this team is built culturally as a team that could succeed in the NCAA tournament. Right now, looks like they'll be in. And actually, a lot of Hockey East teams, as of right now, look like they'll be in. When you look at some of the players that could impact the series, this is a guy that had 4 goals last time that these two teams matched up. Joey Muldowney, 4 goals in the win. And Eric, take us through some of the other guys that we might see some production and important minutes from.
Yeah, that Muldowney 4-goal game, that was the Friday night 4-2 win for UConn. They had just swept New Hampshire and I think they had just swept Lowell as well. And, we were, okay, there's impressive here. It was New Hampshire, I beg your pardon. Can they keep doing it? And then they go up to Maine. They win that Friday game and they get the point on Saturday because of the tie. Maine won the extra point in the shootout. But it was Muldowney's 4 goals on that Friday night. His streak from there, he had a hat trick again last Wednesday against Anchorage. He scored in 4 games in a row. He has 7 goals in the last 4 games. Since December 28th, so the second half of the season, he has 15 goals and 22 points in 13 games. It's remarkable how good he's been. You look at guys like Jake Percival. He had a huge goal in that main series. You look at guys like Hudson Shandor, who scored the tying goal and the game-winning goal in overtime against Lowell 2 weekends in a row when UConn bounced back after losing the Friday game to UMass. And I think that's the thing that stands out, right? That bounce-back game against Lowell last week. And then or 2 weeks ago now, I should say. They play that Wednesday game against Anchorage. You and I have talked about it. We all understand, hey, this is a pairwise red flag if you lose this game. But I was really impressed how Mike Cavanaugh said, yeah, we talked about that. We didn't shy away from how important that was, that it was sort of the last landmine on the schedule. And I like that they did that, right? Because it speaks to a team that's confident enough to understand where they are and to not have to tiptoe around it. And because if they get that win, they're basically locked for the NCAA tournament now. So it should be a really interesting matchup. Seeding's going to be huge. Maine trying to get first. UConn trying to hold on to that first round bye. We'll talk about seeding a little bit later as we go through. But big time series, just the one-off this weekend. Friday night at the Toscano Family Ice Forum. UConn and Maine will bring you that top 15 matchup right here on NESN. We also have Saturday action for you in a crucial seeding series on the final day of the women's regular season. We'll talk about that on the other side. Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. Coming up on Saturday, it's the final day of the women's regular season, and BU and UConn have been in a battle for first place in Hockey East all season long. BU entered this weekend needing just 1 point to clinch the number 1 seed. UConn needed a perfect weekend to have a chance at that number 1 seed. UConn, though, still needs at least a point to hold off the teams behind them. If all goes wrong and they don't get any points this week, there's a world they could drop all the way down to 4th place. So the whole weekend matters no matter what happens on Friday for UConn and BU. This UConn team, which fell victim to Providence last week, this Red Hot Friars team, which we'll talk about a little bit later in our show, against a BU team that, boy, it's been impressive how they've just kept on chugging along ever since Beanpot.
Yeah, they have, and they're back at Walter Brown with a nice new facility, nice locker rooms and everything. So they have that home space back for them, and they've put themselves in a really great position in the final weekend because for a long time, those top 4 teams on the women's side were neck and neck, and BU had always a little bit of separation, but being able to hold on to it by being as consistent as they've been in the second half has been impressive because, they've just always been able to keep that step ahead. And for UConn, because of those losses, both losses last weekend to Providence, they find themselves with still everything's in their own hands because this is a head-to-head weekend, right? Like this is still within reach for them if they can play a perfect weekend and grab all 6 points. They're first place in Hockey East for the second year in a row. That would guarantee them home ice for the whole tournament. As we know, the championship game will be home ice for them no matter if they make it because it's at Toscano. So that is a positive for them, and that's what they're hoping to do. It's also a point of pride to just finish first 2 years in a row and solidify yourself as a team that can continue to do it even with the turnover that they had, especially on defense, losing a lot of key older players, grad students, and they have this goalie tandem that they've ridden. And we saw Tia Chan in both games last weekend, and she's been having another great year for her as she comes to a close on her collegiate career. But those losses to PC meant that BU is really, they could even play not their best hockey this weekend, as long as they get 1 point, they're in a great position. So that definitely helps them out.
And obviously, UConn is the only team that's beaten Boston University since that bean pot. They beat them a couple weeks ago at BU. So, there's also national implications on this game. And it's obviously, quality wins that are available for each of these teams' resumes. But I want to see where UConn's offense is, right? We've talked a lot about it. It had been trending up a little bit for a couple of weeks. Then we saw just that 1-0 win where they got it done against Holy Cross after beating BU a couple of Saturdays ago. But that top line's been so good. Where is that depth scoring? I think we're going to, find out. We'll see in a really important weekend series. So I'm excited to see that. You'll be there on Saturday along with Carson Duggan, and we'll see what happens. And we'll see if we'll be crowning a champion and where UConn will finish up in these standings. Should be really interesting. There's a lot to talk about along the women's slate because we're not just deciding the number 1 seed. We'll tell you about all the scenarios of where teams could finish as we look ahead towards the playoffs when we come back. Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. It's time to go around Hockey East, presented by Boston Harbor Hotel. Let's look at this women's playoff picture. Final weekend of the regular season here. We told you about the top 2 teams, the likely top 2 teams, but there's also 3 teams going for those final 2 spots to host a quarterfinal game. Only 2 of these 3 teams can host, between Providence, Boston College, and Northeastern. We were talking even a month ago. I'm not sure we thought Providence was going to be in this conversation, but they are certainly in this conversation. They may even be leading this conversation right now.
Yeah, and depending on what happens in that BU UConn series, they could finish as high as 2nd place, which they've jumped all the way from, the mid-bottom range of the conference to with this incredibly strong second half, winning 12 of their 14 games since the start of the new year. They're now in contention for one of the top spots in the conference. They're playing for home ice. And not only that, obviously they're hot and their goaltender, Hope Walensky, is hot. But at the same time, they've gotten healthier. So that's good news for them as well. They get Millie Serum back. She's an immediate impact in the weekend series with UConn. She had suffered an injury, then had gone to play in the Olympic qualifiers for Norway. They didn't make it, unfortunately, but she joins Providence again and is on fire. And she actually scored against Merrimack in the first meeting between these 2 teams this season. Providence finishing out the regular season with a weekend series with Merrimack, who, they beat 4-1. It was a game that they dominated for most of it. So they got to feel like they're in pretty good position to get that home ice advantage if they can execute the way that they have so far in the second half.
Yeah, they're not the only teams in this Boston College and Northeastern quadrant trying to see what can happen. And of course, those 2 wins against UConn really feel like it's momentum. So we'll see. It's fascinating that Northeastern right now is the team that might be without a home game in the quarterfinals. That felt impossible just a month ago. Not that they're not capable of winning a round or 2 on the road. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with those 3. There's also an interesting kind of battle going on between New Hampshire and Maine. They enter the weekend separated by just 1 point for the final opening round bye. Now, UNH has a home-and-home with Boston College, so both of those teams need that weekend series. Maine will be hosting Holy Cross. And I think that's the theme, is that really everyone has something to play for. Holy Cross has an opportunity to get a home game in the opening round, right? Thanks to wins in 3 of their last 4 games. They're only 1 point behind UVM after they swept the Catamounts last week. UVM hosts Northeastern. Holy Cross, as we said, will play Maine. It's really impressive how Holy Cross is in this position, and getting a potential opening round home game could be another big step for this program.
Yeah, we saw them get their first win last year, but that was not in a home game. Their first win in a Hockey East tournament game came at BU at Walter Brown. So I'm sure they would love to host for the first time in that program's history. And they really do feel like they've gained ground on the rest of the teams in terms of talent, in terms of being able to beat any team on the women's side of Hockey East. Now that they've gotten their program a few years past coming in and joining the conference and being a D1 team, it's been a building process for them, and they're starting to really be in the picture of part of this conference that is from top to bottom really deep. So for them, it'll be an interesting final end of the weekend. And when you look at our co-Jersey Mike's a sub above player of the week. Reagan Chadwick scored in both games. Abby Hornung stopped 52 of 53 shots for Holy Cross. And so those two both helping their teams get into that good positioning in the playoffs, potentially with being able to host.
There's a lot on the line on the women's side in this final weekend. There's a lot on the line on the men's side as well, with just 3 weekends to go. We'll tell you all about that when we come back.
It's time to go around Hockey East on the men's side. Take a look at some of the important matchups this weekend. And this segment brought to you by Boston Children's Hospital, official Children's Hospital of Hockey East. Well, we want to start looking at UMass. This is a team that has had a really good stretch as of late. And as of right now of this recording, they're just inside the pairwise cut. So this could be another potential Hockey East team that gets into the NCAA tournament with an at-large bid because of a good finish, if they can continue to play that way. And one of the players on that team that's been doing really well all season, but we'll highlight him now as well. Cole O'Hara, our Service Credit Union scoring leader. He had the game-winning goal on Friday and an assist, then scored another goal on Saturday as well. He's a guy that maybe we haven't talked about enough because he has been up towards the top of Hockey East in a lot of scoring categories for most of the season. Right now, he's the Hockey East leader in points with 42, and he's tied for third nationally. That is impressive numbers that he's been putting up, and he's a guy to lean on. They have other guys like Idar Sunyev, the great offensive threat as well. So that top six, I would say, is really deep and really a lot of good, powerful offensive players.
Yeah, and Sunyev back after being injured. He came back for the BC weekend. And we told you if UMass won Friday, not even Saturday, but won Friday, they'd be in the NCAA tournament. And that's still where they find themselves right now. In terms of the picture of Hockey East as well, UMass is 8 right now. They have games in hand against the 4 teams in front of them. So they have a chance to join this conversation of right now, at least, what is seeds 4 through 7. It's kind of crazy, but you have this group with Lowell at the 4 seed right now, UConn 5, Merrimack at 6, and Providence at 7. Those 4 teams are separated by just 2 points. So there's a lot still to determine here. And remember, let's just take those 4 teams. It could become a 5th if UMass gets a win in their game in hand, but only 2 of those teams get a bye from the opening round. And when all of these teams are such intertwined in the pairwise as well, we don't really know whether an extra game would be a positive or a negative to get an opening round game potentially. So it'll be really interesting to see. But I think that everyone is thinking, obviously top 4, but even more so top 5, right? You don't want to risk having another loss on your resume earlier on than you need to. So getting in the top 5, it's going to be fascinating. Lowell's there right now. UConn has been there in the top 4 quite a bit this year. And, Merrimack continues to hang around as well. And then, this Providence team finally got a big win last week, maybe their biggest of the year against BU.
Yeah, it was a huge home win. I would say this is a team in Providence that at Schneider has struggled. They've had some really great road games at home in the first half of the season. In their non-conference schedules, they had some great weekends at home. But against Hockey East opponents, they'd struggled a little bit. And in particular, against BU, this was actually their first win on Friday night since 2019 against BU at Schneider Arena. So you got to go back quite a ways for them to have had home success against the Terriers. And for them, it was a big offensive outburst. This is a Providence team that a lot of times you see them as a defensive team. They don't score a lot. They don't give up a lot. Well, 6 goals for them again in a 6-3 win. They ended up chasing Mikhail Yegaroff, who has been incredible. He hadn't given up more than 2 goals up to that point in his, the beginning of his collegiate career here in the second half. And he gets chased after the game gets to be 4-1. He lets in a 4th goal. They put Matthew Curran back in. And for PC, they're also happy that they got Trevor Connolly back, and he made an immediate impact. He scored the first goal of the game for the Friars. He was a big missing piece for this Friars power play, as well as in overtime. He's a threat 3-on-3. He would have been great to have in the shootouts, which the Friars have had a few of recently when he was absent from the lineup. So that's all good news for them. But for BU, they were able to respond in the Saturday game. They came back. They got a shutout from Mikhail Yegorov. He made 30 saves. It was a 3-0 win. So this ends up being a weekend split, but I do think that it's important to highlight Providence as one of those middle teams in that cluster that's not separated by much, because they could really, that whole pack could go either way. It's a really important end of the season for them, and they remain in the top 10 of the pairwise. So that's been somewhere they've been most of the season.
And there's no more non-conference now, right? Hockey's, by the way, set their all-time non-conference record of 715 win percentage. That beats their previous high of 705 from 2002 and 2003. So that's locked in. And now it's just how these teams kind of fall against each other. It'll be interesting to see. When we come back, we'll take some short shifts and take a look at the Four Nations tournament and how many Hockey East players were involved. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to our show. Time to take some short shifts presented by the Shift Group, helping former athletes and veterans become elite business professionals. This week, the last 2 weeks, the hockey world has kind of been consumed by this Four Nations tournament, which was such a smashing success in this first ever edition of this tournament. The semis and the last group of round robin games and the final were at TD Garden this year. Bridget, you got to be there for the games in Boston, which featured a number of Hockey East alums, but just how special was it getting a chance to be there for and having this tournament played in Boston?
Yeah, it was great to see them back in the area. And I got this sense from talking to a few of the players that played in New England and played for Hockey East that it was special for them to have this, what they all viewed as a really important moment in their careers. So this tournament meant a lot to a lot of people. And for it to be in Boston, guys like Jack Eichel, who used to play at BU, Cale Makar from UMass, Adam Fox, all spoke highly of being able to be back at TD Garden, somewhere that they enjoyed playing.
Thanks so much for joining us for another edition of This Week in Hockey East. For Bridget Prue, I'm Eric Galanti. Coming up next on NESN, it's Friday Night Hockey East on NESN, live from Toscano Family Ice Forum as UConn plays host to Maine.